It might be interesting for you to understand what the function of the chaplaincy itself is.
Okay.
The chaplaincy had many functions. There was, for instance, in the army itself, the chaplain was the man to whom people came with specific problems. And while I functioned in the United States, there were days when I sat all the way late into the night to 11, 12 o'clock with people standing at the door in line, each one coming in with a problem and presenting it, and my making an effort to solve his problem for him or find a solution that he could live with.
Mm-hmm.
Besides that, there was the idea that the chaplain participated with the men. For instance, we had services. Now, I had a special arrangement in the camp landing for, where I think I was the only chaplain, Jewish chaplain in the army, who had a special chapel dedicated as a Jewish synagogue. Nobody had service there except I. But when I did have services, I used to get as many as 400 or 500 men. And there were times when there wasn't enough room. I met, what's his name? He's the executive vice president. He was the executive vice president of the Joint Distribution Committee later.
Schwartz?
No, Schwartz came to Bonds, and he took Schwartz's place.
Haber? Haber?
No, took my place.
Oh, Herbert Friedman took your place.
Took my place in Camp Landing, while he was still in the army.
Yeah.
And later on, he was in Europe, and we had a chaplain's conference. So he came over to me after the conference and said, "You're Rackovsky?" And I said, "Yes. I want to shake your hands. I want to know you." I said, "Well, what's a specialty?" He says, "When you left, we had to rebuild the stairs of the chapel because they were not safe anymore." And that's true. I had the chapel where I had a beautiful blue parochas. I had a Sefer Torah with a gorgeous silver crown and silver breastplate and a yad. And later on, I took that and gave it to a yeshiva in Beersheba. I had it with me for years, and then when I went to Israel, I gave it to yeshiva in Beersheba. Mm-hmm. That was given to me by one of my soldiers, and I asked him that we needed Sefer Torah, and he had one bought, and he bought the silver with it, and it was given to me. And we had the place where to keep it. And I made it plain to him to give it to me not as a gift to the army, because then I would have to give it to the quartermaster, but as a personal gift, so that I wouldn't feel that I'm giving a Sefer Torah away without supervision.
Right.
And then it came to Israel. It's still there. Now, this is the kind of thing that you continue into Europe. You had certain official duties,
right,
services, relationship with the administration, so on. And then a large part of the work was merely a personal contact. Somebody is in trouble, except for one difference. The army man who needed the chaplain had a specific trouble. He knew what was wrong and he wanted it solved. Here you had to sort of create a relationship where people felt that you're friend enough they should be able to talk to you, and maybe in the conversation the difficulties came out. It was a partly psychological cure, you might say, to people who had undergone tremendous pressures, tremendous shocks, and they needed a sounding board, and they needed somebody who would help them clarify themselves to themselves.
Now, were you involved in getting packages from the United States and distributing them to the survivors?
The only packages that I distributed came from my wife. And for all the time that I was there and all the packages that she sent me, and she
I
got
used to send him many, many packages. He came back weighing about 110 pounds because he would not take the food. He distributed to people because he felt that they were more in need than he was.
You
I
see,
used to send salamis and all kinds of things I would scrounge because, you know, those were the days when everything was rationed.
Ration, right.
I had a very inventive father, and he would find things for me. And he never took anything for himself.
You didn't see a need at that point in
I'll
getting
tell you, I saw the need, but there were enough people to take care of that.
For example?
For example, the Joint Distribution Committee had its employees working in that field.
Right.
The many chaplains who needed
Would you
that
like to have some lunch?
chaplains who needed that relationship were willing to do that kind of work, but nothing else.
I don't understand what you're saying.
Well, I'll tell you what the difference is. When you bring a package among people who are hungry and you distribute it,
Right.
You're getting a very warm response.
In other words, you were busy. What you're saying is you were busy involved
I was
with
busy with books,
libraries.
with libraries, with the administrative types of things, which had a sort of a rippling effect outside from me.
Right.
And I could afford to do things without getting the direct kickback.
Mm-hmm. But so that.
So that I didn't really feel that wasting my time by writing to people saying, send me packages is important. There were others who would do that.
Even at the beginning of or I should say at the end of the war, when the JDC wasn't there.
Davidson, when I came there, it was pretty close to the end of the war.
Right, and the JDC wasn't permitted in until much later.
Then it was difficult to get packages anyhow, and it was possible to get as much as we could from the army and distribute. You didn't. I'm not the type of person who will write to say 1,000 or 100 letters and say send me packages.
Right.
I will see what I can do on the spot.
And through your connections with the army,
We could get things, and we did.
Well, in other words, what I'm trying to find out is that there were a number of chaplains who felt that they couldn't get on-the-spot food, and therefore they had to have it sent in.
Yeah.
You are amongst those chaplains that said
We could get it.
we could get it, therefore there's no need.
And we did.
And you did it by various means.
And when you got it when you needed it, you didn't have to wait 6 months to get it.
Right, and you got it on the spot because you went to the
We
depots and
went to
got
the
it.
depot, you scrounged around, you talked to people, and you managed to get things.
Okay.
And that's how you did. I was thinking of something which has sort of escaped me, but let's go and eat and it'll be better.
Okay.
There was in Wiesbaden a camp for displaced people, and within that camp there was a special division that was for ultra-religious people. They call themselves the Kibbutz Chofetz Chaim. A very interesting group. I met them once when a Rabbi Dallin passed the area.
William Z. Dallin.
D-A-L-I-N, I think.
He's in California now.
Yeah, he's in California. He passed by there. And on a Saturday evening, he said, let's go to visit them. Well, let's go to visit them. So we got 4 of us together, and we went to visit the Kibbutz Chofetz Chaim. We got there, and we found them at Melave Malka. And if I ever heard Zmiras sung as it should be sung, it was that evening. It was all soul. When they speak of soul music today, they're talking about ghosts. That was soul. A living chorus of people singing all together, sometimes dividing in their voices and yet coming back together with a perfect musical understanding of the words, the music, the relationship. You felt here were people singing not songs that they knew, but songs that they lived.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to my colleagues, I said, in a situation like this, it would be necessary to say something that would balance the emotion with an idea. But the idea has to be rich. And each one of them spoke, each one in his own way. I remember the echo of what I said. I don't remember it in full. I spoke the last one. I spoke on Yeshorim Darkad Hashem. No, how does it go? It's in Davenan. Tzedek u'mishpat oyev Hashem. You remember how it goes? Unless I take a sitter, I won't remember it. Let me look for it. Ki yoshor dvar Hashem b'chol ma'asehu be'emunah. Ohev tzedaka u'mishpat chesed u'molach chesed ad Hashem molach ha'aretz. And I began by speaking of the fact that being an Ohev tzedaka u'mishpat, it's difficult to reconcile it with the idea that chesed ad Hashem molach ha'aretz. They're contradictory terms. And I spoke of the fact that in relationship to the Jewish people, the mishpat must give way to chesed.
Mm-hmm.
And there are reasons for it. Because the whole structure of the world is b'dvar Hashem. And we are the ones who carry the Dvar Hashem, and if we were to be judged in such a way as to make our existence impossible, the whole structure would fall apart. This is a general idea. The exact words I don't remember. All I remember was that the response was that what I said matched the music. Why do I say it to you? Not to grandify myself. About 2 months later, I came back to them. What did I come for? I had been in Berlin during that time for a Shabbos. In Berlin, the situation was more complicated because there were more DPs and there were more soldiers, and the relationship was less formalized. There was more of a mixture. And the services was a mixture of soldiers and DPs and even some Germans who claimed to be Jews, about whose Jewishness was very many questions. There were many questions about them. But one of the DPs in Berlin asked me to bring regards to some of the people in the kibbutz Chofetz Chaim. So when I returned, I came in and handed my regards over. And we sat down to talk. And again, I'm trying to show you what the personal relationship meant.
Mm-hmm.
Sat down to talk and talked to me, and they asked me, what party do you belong to? Mizrahi, Agudas Yisrael. What happened was this. Mr. Sar, if you heard of him, I hope. He went to Europe for the Joint Distribution Committee, and he was stationed for a time in the kibbutz Chofetz Chaim. He was an ardent Mizrahi. And here he has a group of young people who are very religious, and he was sure that he could make converts of them and make them Mizrahi. He spoke to them of the need to join a party, and they called a meeting, and they joined a party. the Akuda. When I came, they asked me, what party do you belong to? I listened to them, and I stopped off for a little while, and I smiled, and I said to them, I belong to the Jewish party. What do you mean? I said, today you don't belong to a party. When we will have peace and our people will be properly situated, then you can allow yourself luxuries of parties, of divisions, maybe. Maybe then we will have sense enough to know that it isn't important. At the moment, I don't think we can afford it, and I don't think we should indulge ourselves. I belong to the Jewish party.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you get along? I say, what I agree with, what I don't agree with, I tolerate. And what I can't agree with, I accept. Because we are in a position today when we cannot afford not to accept and not to live with all our people. And it's developed on a very large scale. When I left them, they said to me, "We wish you would come more often. You talk differently." That's the personal relationship. Now, those people were wonderful people. I didn't agree with everything they believed in. It's perfectly all right. But their spirit is the spirit that helped create the state of Israel. There were no questions. This is it. We are going to Israel. The Kibbutz Chafetz Chaim was preparing to go to Israel every day. And it tells. Now, this is how these things develop. All of a sudden, they became Agudas Israel. I think that the Kibbutz Chafetz Chaim in Israel today is a result of the Kibbutz Chafetz Chaim that was over there. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure, but I'm under that impression. And that some of the people who came from this Kibbutz Chafetz Chaim worked to create that kibbutz, and that they still carry on the same tradition.
Mm-hmm. Since we have the tape one, perhaps you'll tell me again about your activities in getting guns to...
Oh, that. I told you, that they came to me and they asked me...
A soldier came, an American soldier.
An American soldier, who was... it was interesting. He was an American soldier and had lost a sense of belonging. He wanted to go to Israel, rather, to the Israeli army. The meeting up of American soldiers with the soldiers of the battalion that bore the Jewish insignia
Jewish brigade, yeah.
had a tremendous effect.
On him?
It had a tremendous effect. They felt, here is our army. Mm-hmm. And this man lost his sort of equilibrium because at the end of the war these boys were really tired. And he was talking of going to Israel. And at the same time, he was doing things which I wouldn't approve of. But he came to me one day and he said to me that we need a jeep because we have made arrangements to pick up some ammunition at a dump. They called it a dump, not a depot. And the man who will be on guard will be busy at the time when we will, but we don't have a jeep. I told him that I can't give him a jeep. But if he will need it, but he said he needs it during the weekend. So I'm going away for the weekend and I will have to leave my jeep at such and such a place. That's all I can tell you. And that was it. Later on, somebody says to me, how do you dare do such a thing?
Who was the somebody?
One of my Jewish acquaintances. It's a court-martial offense if you're caught. I said to him a very simple thing. There are occasions when you have to make up your mind whether the act is worth the price. And if the act is worth the price, you do it anyhow. And that's about it.
Yeah, that was the first and last time you were involved with guns?
With guns, yes. I had some contact with the people who were dealing as to boats.
What happened with that?
We sort of made contact and we spoke of the things to get...
Excuse me, could we be specific about when it took place, if possible, and under the circumstances in which it took place?
Actually, I can't recall the specifics.
Okay.
But generally speaking, we had contact and we spoke to people about getting the boats and
but
about...
How did this originate? Did somebody come to you and say, Chaplain, we need boats to go to Israel, could you help us?
The people dealing in boats were much too astute to come out and say, Chaplain, we need something.
And we're
They
talking
were
about the
actually-
Palestinians now.
They were about DP people to get over to Israel.
Right,
The Palestinians who were working in that field,
right.
the Jews who were working in that field, were much too well trained in underground work to come and say, we need something like that. They worked in their own way. They worked with a suggestion, with a hint, until they gained confidence in somebody. If they gained confidence, they spoke about certain things that they need and how can they get them and so on and so forth. And if I knew, we suggested you can see so-and-so, you can see so-and-so. And if there is anything else I can do for you, we'll do it. And that's about it. But they were very astute people. They had to be.
Mm-hmm.
Because all this was done underground. They couldn't do it officially.
Right. Now, do you remember specifically what you did with regard to boats?
Not particularly. I don't recall any specific thing. I recall generally that we had several conversations and that we discussed the matter. We discussed who can go and how they can pick them up and where they can place them and so on, but not anything very specific as to what did I do.
Did you help them raise money for that, or?
We did occasionally, but all the money raising that I did was from among the soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
The soldiers were a tremendously generous lot. I remember one day I said in the university when I was in Biarritz that I would like to have some money, and over a weekend we raised about 60,000 francs.
Which would have been about?
Which was a very respectable amount of money even then.
Would you have any idea how much it was in American
No.
money?
I do remember this much, that during that time there was one day when the currency was changed. From time to time the currency of the United States Army was changed. They had a special currency because some of the black market situation, people accumulated so much. So they said on this day it's cut off and only soldiers can change into the new currency. And I then had about 75 or 80,000 francs, and I was the last one in the line just before the window closed, and it was a terrific experience, whether I will make it or not. I made it.
And they didn't question how come you had so much money?
No, they wouldn't question me. I was a chaplain. Most of the men who changed didn't change that amount. If a man had that amount, he probably distributed among some of his fellow soldiers, and they all went and stood in line. And then there was enough gambling going on for a man to be able to say, I won it.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be surprised what kind of gambling went on in the army. And there was no law against it. Nobody could say to a soldier, you can't gamble. If he gambles with his life, he can gamble with his money.
Mm-hmm. What do you think would have happened had there been no chaplains?
Had there been no chaplains in Europe?
During that period?
I think a great many more people would have died. I think that the direction of the DPs towards Israel would have been much more difficult.
In what way?
Psychologically.
You think the chaplains played an important role in that?
I think that by and large the chaplains had an effect. The thinking of people.
Yeah.
Could
Yeah.
you be
listen,
more
wait a minute.
specific?
Don't hang up. I'm going upstairs. Okay. I'm going to hang up. Wait.
More specifically, let me say this, that people were completely unsettled then.
Mm-hmm.
You had men walking across border lines, just so. I mean, I met a young man who must have been about 18, 20, and talked to him. He's going to Poland, What are you going to Poland for? Maybe he'll find family there. How are you going to go to Poland? He'll walk. He'll walk through Germany. It was in France.
Mm-hmm.
He'll walk through Germany. He'll walk across this and then walk across that. The border lines, they don't mean anything to me. They didn't. Now, when you have people floating like that, where they're going to go isn't very clear. There needs to be somebody who will be able to direct and say, now, here is the goal of our people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this respect, creating or helping to create, the Israeli army had an effect there. The shluchim or shlichim, as they call them, had an effect there. But particularly the prestigious position of chaplains who spoke as if there were no other place except Israel, I believe had a very specific effect.
Mm-hmm.
The army was the American army and the American Jewish chaplain were very prestigious people over there at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because they could do a lot of things.
Now, how would you characterize your activity with the JDC?
It was adjunct. As I showed you, when a couple of Pinson came to me. Some of the other workers came to me.
Do you remember any of the other workers with whom you were involved?
I don't at the moment recall. There were a number of women. Now, the Davis, you mentioned Mrs. Davis. I don't recall her being over there. I traveled with her to South America after I came back. But I think she was there too. She worked for the JDC. Her name was Davis, D-A-V-I-S. Her husband was a medical man. I went with her to South America to speak for JDC after the war.
Mm-hmm.
I'm inclined to think that she had been in Europe too.
Okay.
But she's not alive anymore.
Oh.
So it doesn't make too much difference.
But, in other words, what were the type of things that a couple of Pinson or others in the JDC would have come to you about?
They came to us. For instance, he came about the books. I told you that.
Right.
If he had a specific problem that needed attention through the government.
Mm-hmm. In other words, he would have had his own...
He could have used his own, but sometimes on the spot. You have to approach an officer on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
A chaplain could do it much more directly. He would use a chaplain from time to time to help out in a problem of that sort. Sometimes when they needed something specifically, transportation and such, they could get it directly through their channels, but occasionally they would ask a chaplain if their channels were clogged, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
They'd come over. There was a relationship of sorts, and there were no boundaries, not specific boundaries. You could put across.
Would you say that there was so much activity to be done that there was enough for everybody, and that everybody worked together?
I think there could have been more people, and there would have been more done.
But in terms of your relationship with JDC, that it was one of there was just so much activity to be done that everybody was working together.
I think so. I think so. Occasionally you met opposition from personal opposition from people. Let me see. There was a rabbi there who was in Seattle, Washington before he went to Europe. He has a brother in Israel who worked for the rabbinate, forget the name.
Volgalanter?
Yeah, Volgalanter. He was in Europe. And I remember he came several times to ask me to go with him to places to appear at various functions to help him with various things. Now, there was no question whether I would do it. And he knew that if he asked me, I would do it.
And it was just taken for granted that the chaplain was at the call of the Jewish people.
And Vogelanter was in the JDC?
I don't recall clearly his position because he was in a certain sense competitive with JDC. I once said about him that wherever he is, there happens to be a newspaper photographer. He was working more with the Rabbi Herzog's group about orphans and about...
This is the British...
No, Rabbi Herzog wasn't working with the British. He was working as the chief rabbi. Rabbi Herzog had a peculiar position. I've never been able to clarify it, or maybe, let me say, I've never taken the trouble to clarify his position. It wasn't my job. But he had the position of a chief rabbi, and was working for the Jews as the chief rabbi of Israel. And Vogelanter was his representative in Europe. To the extent that when he came out, Vogelanter used to travel with him and used to advise him on what did happen, what is happening, and so on and so forth. He came several times to me to ask me to help him. Now, I know that from a standpoint of publicity, he was competitive with the JDC. But that didn't mean anything to me. I was a chaplain. I was a neutral force. As long as it did something for Jewish people, we were there at their request.
Were you involved in Aliyah Bet in any way?
Not particularly. Not particularly.
They never asked you for any help or anything?
No. I remember during my stay in Biarritz that I was sick for a time, and afterwards I decided to take some leave and got permission to go to Israel. And I went. I was in Jerusalem, and that was the time when the British were preparing to do all the damage they could to the Jewish community in Israel. The streets were laid out with wire. The soldiers were all over, and so on and so forth. When I came back, they had organized the American Veterans Group, which was at that time beginning to feel that it can be competitive to the American Legion. And they had quite a strong group among the intellectuals. The intellectuals in the army don't go very much for the American Legion, as you know. So they asked me to speak on what I saw in Israel. Of course, it was understood why they asked me, and who asked me. The organizers were some of our boys. And I spoke. I pictured the situation as is, or as was, I should say. And when I got through, some of the British soldiers, there were a number of British soldiers there too, walked out, and they said that they had never heard such a cold-blooded attack on the king as I had made. I wasn't excited, I wasn't disturbed. I merely told fact after fact after fact, and it added up. There was in the army then, the second in command of the university was a professor who had taught in the army, in the university in Cairo, the American University in Cairo. So he got up to ask questions, as others did. But he was a lieutenant colonel and I was only a captain. And before I knew it, he was on the platform with me, and without any preparation, it became a debate instead of a discussion or a question. And he said to me, let me see, he said that he objects to Jews coming into Israel he wants the entire world to accept the Jews. You know. And I said to him, my dear friend, I would like it too, but I don't think the Jews are ready to wait until all of the world becomes saints. So before the world becomes saints, we will take ourselves to Israel. After they become saints, we will go back and be distributed among the nations. If you're getting excited and emotional about it, I see no sense. I say, well, I see very much sense. And if my getting excited over 6 million Jews killed disturbs you, I am very much disturbed over the fact that you're not excited about it. I met him the following day in a barber shop, and he says to me, there must be another side to the story. I say, if there must be another side to the story, show it to me.
Were you ever involved with UNRWA?
Only on a side issue occasionally, nothing special. The UNRWA people came, passed by, you discuss things with them, but nothing special.
What about the Jewish Agency?
The Jewish Agency as such, as an institution, I never came in contact with.
What about, oh, I'm sorry.
They had their officers, they had their type of work. It was, I believe, I'm not familiar with their work. I believe it was more in the diplomatic field, in the political field, than in the actual workings, which was left to JDC.
Mm-hmm. Now, were you involved with other Jewish organizations, Vaad Hatzalah or any of the other?
Vaad Hatzalah was actually Rabbi Herzog's organization.
Vaad Hatzalah from America.
I don't know the boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there was there is a difference.
Actually, I believe that Roger Lerenter was from the Vaad Hatzalah. Mm-hmm. But they worked so closely together with the Israeli group mm-hmm. that there was no distinction. Okay. I couldn't distinguish between the two.
Was there any other groups that you were working with, Hayas or?
Hayas, I can only say this: in coming back on the ship, mm-hmm. the other man who was not of the DPs was a Hayas man.
Oh, he wasn't JDC.
No, he was Hayas.
Okay. And you had mentioned that the Army, on all levels, had been very receptive to your activities.
Yeah. Except, as I said, I mentioned the chief of chaplains there.
Right.
I met one more chaplain who was really, they called him a nut, and he was in a certain sense. He was against everybody and everything. Mm-hmm. He was in Biarritz, and he was soon relieved from his position. He had been in Lourdes, a priest in Lourdes. You know where Lourdes is, the miracle place in France. And he was appointed by the army as a chaplain in the Army University in Biarritz. Mm-hmm. And he objected to the fact that the soldiers made parties for the children, and they took little girls on their laps. He felt it was immoral, that kind of a guy.
With all of the activities that were going on in Europe at that time, this is what annoyed him?
He raised, the soldiers, the general army soldiers, not the Jewish soldiers, raised a lot of money and made parties for orphans, for children, to create an atmosphere of a more normal life. And he objected to it because they were holding children on their lap, babies, little girls on their lap. That guy, one objected when I took the truck out for the kibbutzim.
Yeah.
He objected, and he threatened me that he would create a court-martial, that I took army material for. The officers above him soon got rid of him because of his attitude, and he was never heard of again.
So we can conclude that those army officers...
They were friendly and very considerate.
Do you remember any of them by name who were particularly helpful to you?
Not particularly, no. It was a general understanding. You see, you didn't even have to go to ask for any specific colonel or or a general or anything specific. You went and you did, and nobody said anything against it.
Now, were you involved in working with other Jewish chaplains in the Jewish refugee problem? You mentioned the here or there chaplain.
Hazelcorn occasionally felt it his duty to remind me that I have to do something. And when he came down and found that I was doing without his reminder, he was surprised.
In other words, he was very much involved with the DP work.
He was involved, yes. There was, of course,
he was involved with guns also. I'm told.
I'm told. He may have been, I don't know. Then there was, what do you call him? He was here to speak once. What do you call that rabbi, the Reform rabbi who spoke here?
Yeah, we mentioned him before.
Klausner,
yes. He made a tremendous thing out of what he did. He did a nice piece of work, and there's no gainsaying that. He and I did not work closely together because we have a completely different outlook on Jewish life. He once refused to daven with a minyan because the people wore hats, and since then I refused to daven in any minyan that he was a participant.
But aside from that, you weren't involved with him in any other way?
No. I saw him around town. I saw what he was doing, but that's okay.
But he never called upon you for any assistance or anything?
He didn't call on anybody. He worked. He was more or less a one-man proposition. You see, he happened to, it's not only a matter of wanting to do, you have to be at the right time at the right place. He happened to be at the right place at the right time to do some of the pioneering work. And he didn't need any help. He just had what he had. And he, I believe, got very direct help from the army. In fact, I think they even appointed a woman secretary for him to work with him in this particular work.
Now, is there any area that I have not touched upon that you feel that should be discussed?
Not that I can think of at the moment. You know, years take their toll of memory. You make an impression, you keep it for a while, and then others impress themselves more deeply.
Okay then. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm trying to